Hey guys, welcome back. So getting into more talk on Justice League and the events that have taken place after our talks about the conclusion of the resolve that had taken place at the Source Wall, I wanted to focus a bit on Lex Luthor, who is quite responsible for this, but only because he's been taking counsel from the Batman Who Laughs. And the Batman Who Laughs is really the one who deserves the credit for all that. But moving forward, Lex Luthor is still taking his advice, to where recently we see him use the last bit of advice that he's been listening to over and over from the Batman Who Laughs. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so recently we was talking about the final conclusion and the madness that was going on at the Source Wall, to where the Justice League had figured out that the Omega Titans were actually the solution to fixing it, and for the Omega Titan that they destroyed in Justice League No Justice, Martian Manhunter, Kendra, and John Stewart figured out that Kendra was actually the solution to replacing that Omega Titan through sacrificing herself, which she was about to do until Lex Luthor came through with the Legion of Doom and the recently resurrected Brainiac with the intention of being a catalyst to the Source Wall's destruction. And like we had talked about before, Lex Luthor had did this with the intention of capturing Perpetua, the mother of the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor, to whom also is the most feared cosmic mother who wields the 7 energies of creation, who had also designed a universe before this one to be a self-sustaining weapon that would thrive in perpetual darkness. But for Lex Luthor, capturing her wouldn't have even been possible had he not known about her from the Batman Who Laughs, to whom during the time Lex had taken him prisoner, which was all really just a trick from the Batman Who Laughs to let Lex take him in so he could use Lex. But with seizing this opportunity for himself, the Batman Who Laughs directed Lex to Perpetua, but he also repeatedly gave Lex Luthor the advice that in order to win, you have to remove yourself from the center of everything and be willing to lose everything, which initially made no sense to Luthor, but eventually we find out that he figured out what he needed to do. And so part of him actually implementing this plan, it actually has quite a bit to do with Martian Manhunter, to whom at this time after the destruction of the Source Wall had made his way back to Mars in order to get more answers to all the crazy revelations he was given on Thanagar Prime from the Elder Keep. Because when he had went to Thanagar Prime with Kendra and John Stewart and sensed the presence of the Elder Keep, who had explained to him why he was having all these visions of himself and his family on Mars, which are visions that he had been having throughout the first 14 issues. But like we had talked about in the previous video, with the Elder Keep sharing with Martian Manhunter the history of Perpetua and her army, and how Perpetua's army was pretty much split up between the humans and the Martians, and dividing their different strengths and weaknesses, this then caused Martian Manhunter to return to Mars in order to find someone, and to find this person, he asked for the help of Lex Luthor, who had also agreed to meet Martian Manhunter here alone, but not without taking precautions like using his suit to block telepathy and bringing a gun to block everything else. But with Lex agreeing to meet the Martian Manhunter here, and mostly out of curiosity, but he was also a bit skeptical, mainly because in the eyes of everyone, he's pretty much the one responsible for destroying the Source Wall. So of course, with him agreeing to meet Martian Manhunter here, he's very skeptical of this being a trap, especially when Martian Manhunter whips out Jarro, which Lex thinks that John had brought as a backup plan for Lex blocking his telepathy. But instead, Lex finds out rather quickly that the purpose of Jarro even being here isn't necessarily for him, but for something else. And not just one something else, but a whole lot of something else's. Because John had brought Jarro here as a defense for the Quers, who had noticed their presence here pretty quick, causing the two of them to jump to another spot which was a little bit safer and out of their reach. But the Quers here on Mars, they were thought to be extinct for a long time by most, but they have a bit of a religious history with the Martians, because these creatures which nest on different planets and nest on moons, they feed off of psychic energy, off of memories, longings, and regrets, which is why Martian Manhunter had brought Starro in order to protect the two of them during their conversation. But while they were here, Martian Manhunter explained to Lex that this is the location that the Martians would come to every 10 Martian years as a place of prayer, and while they were here, they would say their Shan, which was a prayer which would allow them to get rid of their painful memories, which was perceived also like a way of meditation and cleansing. But after the recent events and John's revelation from the Elder Keep, he realizes that much of this history had been built upon remnants of the remaining symbol of Perpetua, to which we had talked about in the previous video. The Guardians had went throughout the universe and removed portions of her symbol, and if not portions, her symbol entirely, in order to avoid her return. And at first when Lex hears this, he thinks that John's is trying to stop him or undo what he's already done, but it's also at this time that John goes into more detail about the person that he's looking for, which is someone who he knew when he was in captivity as a child, being held by the Legionnaires, who had made it their mission to find a way with this last Martian to recreate Perpetua's army. And when John was a kid, the Legionnaires would of course prevent him from using any telepathy on them from taking or by taking these pills that were neurological blockers, but he had soon found a friend who was the nephew of the person who was leading this project and continually tried to find a way to communicate with John, whether by writing little messages on his shirt so that John could use his infrared vision and see it, but these messages were something that he needed to keep secret because this kid wasn't supposed to be communicating with John at all. But what he had ended up doing in order to actually speak with John, and initially to apologize for getting John in trouble, because when John used his infrared vision to see the messages, they made John's eyes go red and security like flipped out. So what the kid ended up doing is he stopped taking his pills, which would block John's telepathy, in order to allow them to communicate without having to use the signals. And during this time that John was locked up in here, they became really close friends, and John would even go as far as in his mind creating these different worlds to where him and this kid could go to and pretty much act out these different adventures of being superheroes and really just whatever adventures as kids that they wanted to explore. And while hearing this story, Lex is just like, this ain't what I came for. Like, you are perpetually getting off a topic here. But oh, the contraire, mon frere. I think I said that right. But the reason why Martian Manhunter is looking for this kid is because one, he warned John, whom they had told they were going to let him go, but he had warned John that this was a lie and that they were actually going to kill him. So what this kid did is he rigged the machine that was supposed to execute John, which is actually what helped the young Martian Manhunter to escape. But upon doing this and knowing this would be like their last conversation, the kid told John that he wanted him to know his name, and his name was Alex, which was short for Alexander, and to be more specific, Alexander Luthor. But immediately after telling to Lex, the Quers had sniffed out their psychic energy, and they had only made it out of there by using Starro to ride one of the Quers out of there, or at least to get far enough to use their portals to get back to their different locations. But the whole intent and purpose for Martian Manhunter calling Lex Luthor out here to meet him and sharing this information with him the way that he did, it was in hopes to restore some of Lex's memory from his childhood to which those memories were taken, and hopefully Lex would realize that the man that he'd become perhaps would have been much different had he had the full recollection of these events that had taken place in his childhood. But when Lex initially arrived back, he didn't share any of his information with Brainiac or the others, but rather he just kept it to himself, really just thinking over all this new information that he had learned, and he had actually went to bed that night saying his Shine meditation, which he had also just learned from Martian Manhunter. But after falling asleep, he is rudely awakened, and not even so much awakened, but he finds out that Brainiac has actually connected their minds together with the assistance of the other members of the Legion of Doom in order to find out what Lex knows and share some of the information that Brainiac knows as well with Lex concerning Perpetua in order for them to move forward, and doing so in a way which Brainiac describes will be simple enough for Lex's mind to comprehend, which was a necessary method but disrespectful any way that you word it. But Brainiac saw it necessary to do this mainly out of his lack of trust for Lex Luthor, whom he knew would only share so much information had he simply just asked. And so now, as far as them sharing their knowledge between one another, most of this we already know, as far as their knowledge pertaining to Nth Metal, the origin of Vandal Savage, and that information in relation to Perpetua. But the interesting thing that happens here with Brainiac going first and sharing his knowledge with Luthor on the origin of Vandal Savage and Vandal's initial encounter with Nth Metal, which led him to be immortal, and then not long after led Vandal Savage throughout the years to develop the birth of the Legionnaires Club, which has had a number of different members throughout the past thousands of years. But as of more recent, according to Brainiac's database, which actually goes to prove the words of Martian Manhunter to be true, with it showing that Vandal Savage had actually approached Lionel Luthor and inducted him into the Legionnaires, to which prior to this point Lex did not know about. But the discoveries that he did make prior to talking to Martian Manhunter, he had only found because of the trail that the Batman Who Laughs was leading him on, and doing so with the method of just giving Lex Luthor these breadcrumbs of information that he knew Lex would follow just one by one. But as it turns out, we find out through Brainiac's intel that Lionel Luthor made some of the most amazing strides for the Legionnaire Club, discovering the Steel Force, the Invisible Spectrum, rediscovering the Tear of Extinction, amongst much of the other information that Lex had found within the Legionnaire Legionnaire Club's notes, which were meant to have a level of confidentiality for obvious reasons, but in retrospect it all makes perfect sense, with Lionel Luthor discovering these keys that were leading to Perpetua, to whom Lionel wasn't fully aware of at the time. But in order to make greater strides, this is why he started the Stellaron satellite project, which of course led us to Starman, so on and so forth. But with Lionel just having pieces of the puzzle and also realizing that mankind was meant for something greater, this is what led him to begin the project of abducting Martians and studying them in order to re-merge that missing link between mankind and Martians that was done so many years ago, which of course explained the whole thing about his brother leading the project at the time. But even with Lex getting this information, this isn't the Lionel Luthor that he remembered, and it's mainly because Vandal Savage didn't approve of all the research and progress that Lionel had made, and he viewed Lionel more as a pursuit for his own power, to which Vandal perceived as a form of betrayal. And for Lionel's punishment, he just razed all his laboratories and research, erased Lionel's memory, and kicked him out of the Legionnaires Club. And getting this information was a huge revelation for Lex, because he didn't remember his father quite that way, and for the most part he just remembered his father as this guy who was drunk and abusive, who knew that he was meant for more, and that was about it. But it's here that Lex tells Brainiac that I know what you're missing, because there's a portion that you are blind to, much like Vandal Savage was, but I'm about to fill you in. And when Lex tells this to Brainiac, he takes him back to the memory of beating Vandal Savage to death with the doorknob, which had happened in Justice League issue number 1. And it's crazy because after all the revelation that's come across to this point, it's kind of like poetic justice. But immediately when Lex Luthor shows this to Brainiac, Brainiac looks at him like, okay, is this supposed to be a threat? And Lex, with the comeback of the century, says, no, I'm just simplifying this into a way that you can understand. And I'm telling you, that comeback was just pettiness to perfection. Like, enter my mind and witness my Omega level pettiness. But what Lex was doing here is he was showing Brainiac that he has the opportunity to get right what Vandal Savage had wrong. And with doing this, he was implementing the last bit of advice that he had got from the Batman Who Laughs, who had told Lex that he needed to lose it all in order to gain it all. And without that mindset, he would never achieve his greatest potential. And with using this advice from the Batman Who Laughs, Luthor had actually planted a virus within his own mind that essentially would just kill Brainiac again and make him a database for Luthor's disposal. But instead of leaning towards that, which Luthor expected Brainiac to do at some point, he instead leaded more into the council of the Batman Who Laughs, and he asked Brainiac to open up and feel what he feels, because it's the emotion, the faith, the ambition, it's those things that Brainiac lacks on his side individually that would make a world of a difference if they put their minds together collectively. And with Brainiac agreeing to do so, and really he almost had to, because between the two he had a lot more to lose if he'd said no. But with Brainiac agreeing to open up his mind and experience the emotional aspects from Lex Luthor, which he hadn't before, this then put them mentally in sync on a level that Grodd mentions that he had never seen before. And for Brainiac, this is also a benefit, because what they're opening up will actually introduce them to a territory that Brainiac has never seen before, or really anyone else for that matter, because together they have achieved access to the 6th dimension, to which much of the credit goes to Lionel Luthor, who initially had this idea but it was shot down by Vandal Savage. But it was Lionel Luthor who had discovered the known elements from the 5th dimension, that within this known 5th dimension it actually had the keys to opening the 6th. But now with Brainiac and Luthor's mind both in sync, all of this information is just at Luthor's disposal, and the strides that would have taken him years to develop, they happen just within a moment with him and Brainiac being connected. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Man, I gotta tell you, we may have not seen a lot of the Batman Who Laughs, like just being everywhere throughout Justice League and a number of the different series, but he has been busy in the background, and not just in other worlds, but in this universe as well. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.